Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron, as part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. This episode was recorded as a closed dialogue via Zoom at the beginning of the 2020 pandemic. Today, we join Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, in conversation with San Francisco-based choreographer Nicole Klaymoon. Klaymoon is the founder and artistic director of the Embodiment Project, whose recent work includes a piece titled Ancient Children, which explores the ways restorative justice can interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. This conversation was her second engagement at the center, as she is an alumna of the NCCAkron's dancing lab, Screendance, that took place in July of 2018.
First up, how or when did you know you wanted to be a choreographer?
There is a specific moment I'm remembering where I felt a very deep fire in my being, and it was when I was in undergrad, and I was in a class that Rennie Harris was teaching, and he was really generous with talking about his experience professionally and the landscape of dance in a way that I was really hungry for, just getting the opportunity to work with an artist that was really doing work. And he had mentioned, if I'm remembering correctly, something to the effect of, many choreographers take the route of performing with professional companies for many years and kind of learning the ropes in the industry and getting more of the experience as a dancer within a company. And then at some point there's a maturational growth step where they decide to start their own company or do their own work. And then he's like, and then there's other choreographers that just do the damn thing, that like skip that step. And it's, and I just remember hearing that. And there was like this voice inside of me, like, yep, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to figure it out and do it. I just remember this, like my whole body being activated. And, I came to dance in in a more of a studio or like institutionalized way of training, like relatively later in my life. I didn't like grow up training in studios. It was always like a social dance, and so I had always felt behind, especially because what was being modeled was, in order to be do this as a profession in the US, it's like through Eurocentric forms, i.e. ballet, modern. And what I was being exposed to was, you had to start really young and that wasn't my trajectory. So at the time I was kind of surprised, like, oh, I'm going to really, step into this. But, that fire and that calling I just felt something in my spirit in that moment. So I think that's the most poignant that I can remember.
I love that also because it sounds that Rennie, there were suggested two different options, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something else that Eurocentric forms, they're like, well, this is the way we do it, right? Mm-hmm. That also kind of seems to perpetuate, is it a corporate or capitalist idea of a structure of a ladder and a single way forward? Mm-hmm. So I also kind of observed that that's what would resonate with you. We're like, yep, I'm going to do that thing. I love it. So, how do you start, right? When you are going to make a new piece, what inspires you? Is it music? Is it an idea? Is it something else entirely? Where do you begin?
Mm-hmm. So I often realize years later that I had already started and I wasn't conscious of it. I just, started, with the artistic process. I'm really led by the mystery, like being in the mystery of the creative process and being really responsive to the narratives in the body that I get to collaborate with and what's relevant in that moment. That's like what stories are really ripe and ready to be told within that really arise as I think, result of like the trust that I get to build with the artists and, always reinforcing that we each have agency in regard to what stories we want to tell and when they're ready to tell and how we want to tell them. Do we want to do it, just through the body, or do we want to be more explicit with language and image? So I do a lot of surrendering to just what's in the moment, what's present with and alive and with the artists that I'm working with. And that is just like a very deep process of discovering, like, well, what are we saying and how do these personal stories relate to a bigger story that's, about specific social justice issues that we work with. And and then sometimes that's usually simultaneously, I'm doing a lot of research through interviews and conversations and documentaries and reading on specific subjects. And sometimes they're really far-reaching dots, like how can this translate in movement? It has been a very interesting process, and sometimes it's felt kind of disparate, like where it's more the movement is more personal, and then my research might be, on a specific subject that I'm trying to figure out how they link together, and then I guess my creative process, I'm very inspired by music and kind of getting to the essence of like the energetic essence. Like oftentimes the song, if we're creating an ensemble piece, the actual song, I don't always have when I'm start the piece. I'm more in the energetics of the piece and figuring out which being in the work is kind of holding the focal point of the story. It's like a movement narrator sorts. And then, and so I'll work with music that's totally oftentimes like dissonant with the work, just to kind of get a sense of how to find the edges energetically. So there's certain music I work with a lot to get inspiration and to like, I work a lot in process with poetry, doing the piece to, even if I know it's going to eventually be to a song, we might, or, to music, we might start it to a recording of a poem, or, sometimes we'll bring in music that's just like totally unrelated, but just kind of helps to draw out the energies of the piece.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up the poetry and spoken word aspect too, because sometimes that also makes it into the sound score of the piece. And you were actually the artist that introduced me to the term of choreo poetry. Would you care to elaborate on what that is a little bit and how that adds some sort of sound element too?
Sure. My relationship to that term, or my interpretation of what choreo poetry is really the intersection of movement and poetry that's spoken live. So finding where is the movement propelling the message, and where is the language. And, how can dance speak and how can language move and how can they intersect in a way that doesn't inside of the body in a way that doesn't override. It's not like just putting movement as filler, but if the language is leading what's happening with the body, like is the body moving, in harmony with the syllables, as though it's like a lyrical piece that's spoken live, or is the body dissonant, and in contrast, like maybe the language is spoken really fast, but the body's moving slow, and how can movement animate the language? So, that experience with poetry where it's like, you can actually see the language hanging in the air, like a metaphor, an image. It's like alive, like the poem is living in the atmosphere. Like, how does the poem actually live in the body? Where do the words move physically? Like, is this poem coming from your heart, your center, your elbow? And really finding that sweet spot of that marriage of those two forms inside of the body has been a really exciting journey, especially working with specifically popping, which is so much about presentation and illusion, and so much specificity and isolation. I'm really intrigued by how language can serve in that, like how popping can be a container for language of sorts. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or if movement is the subtext of the words. Sometimes we explore that with embodying monologues that are rooted in documentary theater. So how does the movement actually disrupt the language and show, maybe the story that's spoken live, where does, like, language can only take it so far, I think. And somehow when those two forms are coupled together, in a way that is really aligned, it can kind of show what movement serves to do that is beyond what the confines of language. Mm-hmm. So is what we're striving for.
Yes, and it's felt too. Now, but having you sort of dissect the approach to it tells me so much about my own experience as a viewer when having got to see your performances. One of the biggest creative challenges, and I think that this goes for people, whether they're writing a book or a poem or making a dance, how do you name a dance? What's your process?
That's so funny. My relationship to titles it's just been such an interesting challenge that I appreciate. Often for me takes a lot of back and forth with community and with my intimate collaborators, because I've come up with some titles and run it by people and people are like, what? Like, no. And so I think like there's like in the kind of insipid stages of titling, I've either had experiences where the title came right away, or a title that has, this is what's so fascinating about the great mystery of the creative process, how something can feel so right one day and then the next day feel just not like, what was I thinking? But I needed to experience that sense of rightness and alignment as like a stepping stone to get to the next place. So it kind of unveils another layer. So oftentimes I'll use titles as space holes, and then just the title will kind of let me know with time. Like it's almost like the title chooses the piece. Like the landing. Like I like to give myself time to like let it land and see if it really is right. But sometimes like I'll just give myself the space to just be like, okay, I'm not really sure about this title. But right now we're going to stick with it. And then, a month later, it'll be like, okay, now it's like really landed and it's living inside of the artists and we're connecting to it. So that's when I choose it. I don't normally I give it time to, but it can be, I also, if it's not there, like if I don't feel like I have a title yet, I'd rather just not be titled. I don't like to just put something on that doesn't feel right, and that can be a little tricky with like production deadlines and all the things. Cause so much of our process is like live in the moment. Like what is aligned. If the ending of the piece hasn't revealed itself yet, like we will stay in the unknown. Maybe it's the 11th hour that we figure that out, but we'll be in that space of unknown until it feels right.
I love the idea that the title doesn't have to be so finite, but that it also has some room to evolve with the process. Mm-hmm. And that you could say it doesn't fit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
and give yourself that permission. Mm-hmm. Also related to the process not being linear, what do you do when you're in a creative rut?
Well, I like to reframe blocks as their obstacles that are purifying the path. So instead of energizing the rut, it's like, okay, how can I create a sense of spaciousness inside of myself to embrace that something is moving? It might be in the subterranean layers of my being and I'm not conscious of it yet, but to just trust the process of oftentimes things that feel like a obstacle internally or a block are manifest as like resistance that I really like to work with internally and really try to distill it down. Like, what is this really about? Is this about my fear? Is this fear because it's not aligned? This choice isn't aligned? Or is this the terror that's an indicator of like stepping into something expansive I'm just weathering the storm on the inside of what comes up for me around taking a stride or taking a risk. Those are usually what feel like ruts to me. And then there's another way I like to do, like really working with relationship. Like, I'm so grateful that our practice is community based and so relational because if I'm feeling like stagnant or feeling some paralysis, engaging someone that I have a artistic relationship with that we might session together or be accountability buddies. We're just going to free write every morning or kind of create practices in community that can support in moving through that energy. It's been really helpful.
Nice. Mm-hmm. I feel we've alluded to a couple of different things that you're kind of aware of and navigating, sometimes working in tension with, like Eurocentric institutions in dance, making space that elevates social dance practices. But what does the term 21st century dance practices, what did that sort of bring forward for you? You accepted the invitation to come teach as part of it. So I hope there was some sort of resonance. I'm wondering how you might define that as a maker in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think the times that we're in are really showing us that, it's all of these racial disharmonies that have been present for centuries are really being more visible, and there's a real opportunity here to be visualizing a new world, and these institutions that these policies that are perpetuating injustices. If we distill that down to the racism underneath that and really see that there is, if we're not trying to subvert the system, and for those of us that are racialized as white that are benefiting from these systems, then that is perpetuating this racist ideology that has, I think, got us into this situation in the first place, in regard to the earth just being like, nope, we're going to slow down. It's not business as usual. This is time to really imagine what could a new world be for us, and what and to take to lift up the voices of folks that are really leaders in that. And I think that with the 21st century practices, to me, that's like, what is our future, and what is historically the role of dance in that? Dance has always been, artists have always been essential in the revolution, and especially when we're talking about like dismantling white supremacy. I really love how Resmaa Menakem, who's the author of Grandma's Hands, talks about white supremacy as white body supremacy, that lives in our body, and these historical traumas live in our body. So how can we be challenging white supremacy in a way that is working with our bodies, and what is the future of dance as the capacity and the inherent medicine of dance to be, transmitting the consciousness of our bodies and unveiling those stories that have been invisibilized. And so I think that I know this is a long-winded response, but I think that the 21st century practices for me is really about how can dance be really like held as sacred as what it is, and how can we challenge, the ways that white supremacy permeates the concert dance landscape and all of these institutions to break that down and find a new way so that dance can be shared and celebrated as something that is going to be, get us through and incite humanity in this time.
A lot of that resonates, I think, in designing 21st century dance practices. We were definitely trying to push past the what had been prioritized as the aesthetics that prevails in 20th century, that continues to perpetuate white body centered practice or work. And it might also offer the sort of holistic perspective that you brought in. It was like, a 21st century dance practice isn't about an aesthetic, but it's about who we are in the world, in our community, and how we want to navigate. Embracing the politics of the dancing body first, as opposed to that being a subtext that we weren't acknowledging or prioritizing in the country. So I love your response. I have one more question, though.
Okay, sure.
Curious, for someone who wants to make a creative life, what is the best piece of advice that you have ever received, or would you like to offer a piece of advice instead of passing one on, but offer one of your own to anyone who's looking to develop and make their own creative life moving forward?
Well, I'll keep this concise because I have many things I'd love to share here. I think that something that has really served me is the understanding that no means not now, and that no is actually a really positive thing. Rejection, it's part of if the door doesn't feel like it's opening, to not take that personal, because that is that has just rejection has been what has, I think is oftentimes for myself trying to reframe that as a initiation or an opportunity to like, how am I going to respond to this rejection, and find that inside of myself instead of looking externally for, oh, this opportunity or this opening means that my work is valid. But how can I cultivate that for myself, and to just really stay in conversation with other artists that are doing, whose work is in resonance with your own, and to have those relationships and that intimacy, because it's a very vulnerable path, to try to put ourselves out there in this way, and the strength of having folks that really get it and can be with you in it has been invaluable to me. And, cultivating practices of just holding strong to your own creative inquiries and what is calling your spirit, like how to really nurture that. Because, everybody's going to have an opinion and want to tell you what they think and all those things. So how to really stay strong in ourselves, to have that strong sense of, that calling, like why do I have these questions, and creating that space inside of ourselves, I think is really essential to be able to, have sustainability and longevity. Yeah.
Yes. I so love just to comment that being true to yourself doesn't mean that you have to isolate yourself, right? That sort of tension to be in dialogue or concert with others whose work resonates with you too. Sometimes you don't know something about yourself until you are seen in context. And that's another form of feedback. And as someone who has had the privilege of being in it with you for some time through part of your journey, I'm so grateful for that we could continue that together. So
me too.
Thank you very much, Nicole Klaymoon.
Inside the Dancers Studio Lunchtime Talk Series is supported by NCCAkron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, and the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. Ellis Rovin is our composer and editor. Transcription by Madeline Greenberg. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Kraus. And Julian Curett and Kat Wentz are our artist coordinators. To learn more about NCC Akron, please visit us online at nccakron.org or follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCC Akron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching Inside the Dancers Studio. Thank you for listening, and stay curious.